You used to care deeply about your work, your relationships, your goals. You had energy for the things that mattered to you. You could handle stress without falling apart, and you could bounce back from difficult days. But somewhere along this way, something fundamental shifted. Now you drag yourself through each day, feeling like you're running on empty. Simple tasks feel overwhelming. You can't remember the last time you felt genuinely excited about anything. You're exhausted but can't sleep well. You're hungry but nothing tastes good. You're surrounded by people but feel completely alone. You tell yourself you just need a vacation, a weekend to recharge, a change of scenery. But deep down, you know this isn't ordinary tiredness. This is something deeper, more pervasive. It's like a gray fog has settled over your entire existence, draining the color and meaning from everything you once found engaging. You've entered the territory that millions of people know all too well, but rarely discuss openly. Complete and total burnout. What if I told you that your burnout isn't a character flaw, a sign of weakness, or evidence that you're not cut out for your life? What if this devastating exhaustion isn't really about working too much or caring too little, but about something far more fundamental? The complete collapse of your body's most important regulatory system? What if your burnout is actually your vagus nerve crying out for help, sending distress signals that you've been misinterpreting as personal failure? Burnout isn't just being tired from working hard. It's not the kind of fatigue that can be fixed with a good night's sleep or a relaxing weekend. Burnout is what happens when your nervous system becomes so overwhelmed and dysregulated that it essentially shuts down non-essential functions to preserve whatever energy remains for basic survival. It's your body's emergency response to chronic stress that has gone on too long without adequate recovery. The vagus nerve, the longest cranial nerve in your body, and the master controller of your parasympathetic nervous system, plays a crucial role in preventing and recovering from burnout. When your vagus nerve is functioning optimally, it acts like a sophisticated stress management system, helping you activate when you need to meet challenges, and then returning you to states of rest and restoration when the challenges pass. It coordinates your heart rate, breathing, digestion, immune function, and emotional regulation, ensuring that all your body systems work together harmoniously. But when your vagus nerve becomes suppressed or exhausted from chronic stress, this coordination breaks down. Your nervous system loses its ability to distinguish between genuine emergencies and everyday stressors. Your stress response becomes hyperactive, while your recovery response becomes sluggish or non-functional. You end up trapped in a state of chronic activation without access to the restorative processes that would normally replenish your energy and motivation. This is the hidden physiology of burnout that most people don't understand. We tend to think of burnout as a psychological phenomenon, losing passion, becoming cynical, feeling overwhelmed by demands. But these psychological symptoms are actually the downstream effects of a nervous system that has become completely dysregulated. When your vagus nerve isn't functioning properly, you lose access to the physiological states that support engagement, motivation, creativity, and resilience. The modern work environment is particularly toxic to vagal function. Most jobs require sustained attention and productivity without adequate recovery periods. You're expected to be constantly available, always responsive, perpetually productive. Your nervous system activates to meet these demands, but it never gets the clear signal that it's safe to rest and restore. Over time, this creates what researchers call allostatic load, the wear and tear on your body from stress that never gets properly resolved. But work stress is just one piece of the burnout puzzle. The vagus nerve is also heavily involved in social connection and the ability to feel safe in relationships. When your work environment feels emotionally unsafe, whether due to conflict, competition, unrealistic expectations, or lack of support, your vagus nerve interprets this as a threat to your survival. You end up expending enormous amounts of energy just trying to navigate social dynamics and protect yourself from perceived threats. The chronic inflammation that often accompanies burnout is another sign of vagal dysfunction. Your vagus nerve is responsible for what researchers call the inflammatory reflex, your body's ability to detect inflammation and activate anti-inflammatory responses. When vagal tone is low, this reflex becomes sluggish, allowing inflammation to become chronic and systemic. This chronic inflammation doesn't just affect your physical health. It directly impacts your brain function, contributing to the brain fog, mood changes, and cognitive difficulties that characterize burnout. The gut-brain connection through the vagus nerve is particularly relevant to burnout. Your gut contains its own complex nervous system that communicates extensively with your brain through vagal pathways. Chronic stress disrupts gut function, creating inflammation and imbalanced microbiomes that send distress signals to your brain through the vagus nerve. Your brain receives these signals and responds as if you're sick, triggering what researchers call sickness behavior, fatigue, reduced motivation, social withdrawal, and loss of pleasure in activities you once enjoyed. This is why so many people with burnout also struggle with digestive issues, food sensitivities, or changes in appetite. It's not a coincidence. These are all manifestations of the same underlying vagal dysfunction. Your gut problems are contributing to your mental and emotional exhaustion, while your chronic stress is making your gut problems worse, creating a vicious cycle that perpetuates the burnout state. Sleep disturbances are another hallmark of burnout that directly reflects vagal dysfunction. Quality sleep requires your nervous system to shift from sympathetic activation to parasympathetic restoration, a transition that's primarily controlled by your vagus nerve. When vagal tone is compromised, this transition becomes difficult or impossible. You might fall asleep, but you don't enter the deep, restorative phases of sleep that actually replenish your energy and process the day's stresses. This creates one of the cruelest aspects of burnout, being exhausted but unable to get truly restorative rest. You might spend 8 or 10 hours in bed, but wake up feeling like you haven't slept at all. Your body is crying out for restoration, but your nervous system can't access the states necessary for genuine recovery. This leaves you running on fumes, becoming increasingly depleted without any way to refuel. The emotional numbness that often accompanies burnout is another direct result of vagal dysfunction. When your nervous system is chronically overwhelmed, it sometimes shuts down emotional responsiveness as a protective mechanism. This isn't depression in the traditional sense, though it can certainly contribute to depressive symptoms. It's more like your nervous system has gone into energy conservation mode, shutting down non-essential functions to preserve whatever resources remain. This emotional shutdown can be particularly distressing because it affects your connection to the things and people you care about most. You might look at activities that used to bring you joy and feel absolutely nothing. You might interact with loved ones and feel like you're going through the motions without any genuine emotional engagement. This isn't because you don't care anymore. It's because your nervous system has temporarily suspended your capacity for positive emotions to conserve energy for basic survival functions. The social withdrawal that characterizes burnout also reflects the vagus nerve's role in social engagement. When your vagus nerve is functioning properly, it supports what researchers call the social engagement system, your ability to connect with others, read social cues, and feel safe in interpersonal interactions. When vagal function is compromised, social interactions become more effortful and draining rather than nourishing and restorative. Many people with burnout find that they start avoiding social activities that they used to enjoy, not because they don't want connection, but because their nervous systems simply don't have the resources to manage the complex demands of social interaction. Being around other people requires processing facial expressions, voice tones, emotional nuances, and social dynamics, all of which become overwhelming when your nervous system is already stretched to its limits. This social isolation often makes burnout worse because social connection is one of the most powerful ways to support vagal health and nervous system regulation. When you withdraw from relationships due to exhaustion, you lose access to the co-regulation opportunities that could help restore your nervous system balance. This creates another vicious cycle where burnout leads to isolation, which worsens. Burnout. The perfectionism and overachievement patterns that often contribute to burnout can also be understood through the lens of vagal dysfunction. When your nervous system is chronically activated, it becomes hypersensitive to potential threats, including the threat of criticism, failure, or not meeting expectations. This hypervigilance manifests as perfectionism, a constant scanning for potential problems and a compulsive drive to control every detail to prevent catastrophe. But perfectionism is incredibly energy-intensive and creates chronic stress that further suppresses vagal function. You end up trapped in a pattern where your attempt to manage anxiety through control and perfection actually creates more anxiety and depletes your nervous system further. Breaking this cycle requires understanding that perfectionism isn't really about high standards. It's about a nervous system that feels too threatened to ever truly relax. The loss of creativity and innovation that often accompanies burnout reflects the way chronic stress affects brain function. Creativity requires access to what researchers call divergent thinking, the ability to make novel connections between ideas and approach problems from multiple angles. This type of thinking is only possible when your nervous system feels safe enough to explore and play rather than constantly scanning for threats. When your vagus nerve isn't functioning properly, your brain shifts into a more rigid survival-focused mode that prioritizes known solutions over creative exploration. You lose access to the mental flexibility and openness that creativity requires. This is why burned-out people often feel like they've lost their edge, their innovative thinking, or their ability to solve problems creatively. The immune system dysfunction that often accompanies burnout is another clear sign of vagal involvement. Your vagus nerve plays crucial roles in coordinating immune responses and regulating inflammation. When vagal tone is low, immune function becomes either overactive, creating chronic inflammation and autoimmune-like symptoms, or underactive, leaving you susceptible to frequent infections and slow healing. Many people with burnout notice that they get sick more often, take longer to recover from illnesses, or develop mysterious symptoms that doctors can't fully explain. These aren't separate health problems. They're manifestations of the same nervous system dysfunction that's creating the psychological symptoms of burnout. The hormonal disruptions associated with burnout also reflect vagal dysfunction. Your vagus nerve influences the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which controls stress hormone production. When vagal tone is compromised, this system can become dysregulated, leading to either chronically elevated stress hormones or inadequate stress hormone responses. Both patterns contribute to the energy disruptions, mood changes, and physical symptoms that characterize burnout. Understanding burnout as vagal dysfunction, rather than personal failure, opens up entirely new approaches to recovery. Instead of trying to push through exhaustion or forcing yourself to care about things that feel meaningless, you can focus on supporting your nervous system's natural capacity for regulation and restoration. This isn't about working harder or having more willpower. It's about giving your vagus nerve what it needs to remember how to function properly. Recovery from burnout requires what researchers call nervous system rehabilitation, rather than just rest or stress management. Your vagus nerve needs specific stimulation and support to regain its regulatory capacity. This involves practices that directly strengthen vagal tone while creating the environmental and lifestyle conditions that support nervous system healing. Breathwork represents one of the most accessible and effective tools for vagal rehabilitation. In burnout recovery, specific breathing patterns can directly stimulate your vagus nerve and begin to restore the balance between activation and restoration in your nervous system. The key is breathing practices that extend your exhale longer than your inhale, particularly when combined with slow, conscious breathing that activates deep, diaphragmatic muscles. But effective breathwork for burnout goes beyond just relaxation. Breathing. It involves retraining your nervous system to access restorative states throughout the day rather than remaining trapped in chronic activation. This might involve breathing practices that help you transition between work and rest, breathing patterns that support better sleep, or emergency breathing techniques that can interrupt stress spirals before they overwhelm your system. Cold exposure. Therapy can be particularly powerful for burnout recovery because it provides concrete evidence that your nervous system can still respond and adapt. Many people with burnout lose confidence in their body's ability to handle any kind of stress or challenge. Controlled cold exposure, whether through cold showers, ice baths, or cold water swimming, demonstrates that you can activate your stress response and then recover, helping rebuild trust in your nervous system's resilience. The key is starting very gently and building tolerance gradually. The goal isn't to shock your already overwhelmed system, but to provide manageable challenges that help strengthen your vagal tone and restore your confidence in your body's adaptive capacity. Movement practices specifically designed to support vagal function can be incredibly healing for burnout recovery. This isn't about intense exercise that further depletes your already exhausted system, but rather gentle, rhythmic movements that help discharge accumulated stress while supporting parasympathetic activation. Yoga, Tai Chi, walking in nature, gentle stretching, or even rhythmic swaying can provide powerful vagal stimulation when approached mindfully. The social connection piece of burnout recovery is crucial, but often challenging because burnout typically involves social withdrawal and difficulty trusting relationships. Gradually rebuilding your capacity for safe social connection often starts with very low-demand relationships, perhaps with pets, nature, or one or two carefully chosen individuals who feel genuinely safe and supportive. Co-regulation, the process by which calm nervous systems help regulate activated nervous systems, can be particularly healing for burnout recovery. Spending time with people, animals, or environments that feel deeply peaceful can help your nervous system remember what regulation feels like and begin to restore its own capacity for self-regulation. Professional support is often essential for burnout recovery, particularly when burnout is severe or has been ongoing for extended periods. Therapists who understand nervous system function, somatic practitioners, and other trauma-informed professionals can provide the safety and expertise needed to navigate the recovery process without overwhelming your already fragile system. Working with professionals who understand polyvagal theory and nervous system regulation can ensure that your recovery process is appropriately paced and supported. They can help you recognize when you're pushing too hard or when you need more support and provide tools for managing the temporary increases in anxiety or depression that sometimes occur during nervous system healing. Environmental modifications become crucial for burnout recovery because your hypersensitive nervous system needs extra support to feel safe enough to begin healing. This might involve creating quiet, restful spaces in your home, reducing exposure to overstimulating media or environments, improving air quality and lighting, or making workplace modifications that reduce stress triggers. The goal isn't to create a perfectly controlled environment forever, but to provide enough environmental support that your nervous system can begin to relax its hypervigilant monitoring for threats. Even small environmental changes can have significant impacts when your system is in a vulnerable, healing state. Nutrition plays important roles in vagal function and burnout recovery. Chronic stress and burnout often involve gut health issues, nutrient depletion, and inflammation that interfere with nervous system function. Anti-inflammatory foods, gut healing protocols, and addressing nutritional deficiencies can provide crucial support for nervous system healing. But it's equally important to approach nutrition changes gently and without adding more pressure to your already overwhelmed system. Many people with burnout develop complicated relationships with food, eating, and self-care that need to be addressed with compassion rather than rigid protocols. Sleep becomes absolutely critical for burnout recovery because quality sleep is when your nervous system does most of its restoration and repair work. Creating conditions that support deep, restorative sleep often requires addressing both the practical aspects of sleep hygiene and the nervous system activation that interferes with sleep quality. This might involve evening practices that help your nervous system transition from activation to restoration, environmental modifications that support better sleep, and daytime practices that reduce overall nervous system activation so that sleep becomes more accessible and restorative. The timeline for burnout recovery varies significantly between individuals, but most people begin noticing subtle improvements within weeks of consistent nervous system support practices. Early signs of recovery might include slightly better sleep, moments of unexpected calm, reduced reactivity to minor stressors, or small returns of interest in activities that had felt meaningless. Deeper recovery typically unfolds over months of consistent practice and often involves what researchers call window of tolerance expansion, gradually increasing your nervous system's capacity to handle stress without becoming overwhelmed. This process requires patience and self-compassion, as recovery is rarely linear and often involves temporary setbacks or periods of increased symptoms. The long-term vision of burnout recovery goes beyond just returning to your previous level of functioning. The goal is developing what researchers call post-traumatic growth, emerging from the burnout experience with greater self-awareness, stronger boundaries, deeper connections, and more sustainable ways of engaging with life's demands. Many people describe burnout recovery as a profound awakening to their own needs, values, and limits. They develop better attunement to their nervous system signals, stronger skills for self-regulation, and more authentic ways of living that honor their genuine capacity rather than pushing beyond sustainable limits. Your burnout isn't a sign that you're weak, lazy, or inadequate. It's a sign that your incredibly sophisticated nervous system has been working overtime to help you navigate demands that exceeded your resources. Your vagus nerve has been doing its best to support you through impossible circumstances, and now it needs your conscious support to restore its natural capacity for regulation and resilience. Recovery from burnout isn't about returning to the same patterns that created the exhaustion in the first place. It's about building a fundamentally different relationship with stress, work, relationships, and your own internal signals. You understand burnout as nervous system dysfunction rather than personal failure. You can approach recovery with the compassion, patience, and appropriate support that genuine healing requires. Your vagus nerve is waiting to help you rediscover what it feels like to be energized by your life rather than depleted by it, to feel engaged rather than numb, to experience sustainable motivation rather than manic drivenness. With the right understanding and support, burnout can become a doorway to a more conscious, sustainable, and genuinely fulfilling way of being in the world.